Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. Today I'm talking about chapter 13 in the text, but we're starting this week by looking at the syllabus. So why are we looking at the syllabus? Well, the reason we're looking at the syllabus is this week you have a primary source exercise that comes out of the textbook. It's a challenge. And I want to talk to you real quick about why we're doing it and what skills it builds in you outside of like history, like relevance and those sorts of things. So when we look at the student learning outcomes on your syllabus, the first one, student learning outcome number one, is that if you take this class, you'll be able to learn how to comprehend and interpret various artistic and humanistic texts, that means documents, works of literature, art, film, history, etc., and documents. So we're going to do that in this textbook exercise that's coming up in this module. And then also SLO4, Student Learning Outcome number 4, demonstrate an understanding of the intricacies and complications and uncertainties of historical explanation. When we go through the primary source exercise this week that comes out of the inquisitive system that came with the textbook, it asks you to read some primary sources, and then it asks you, hey, why might this source not be credible? Okay, which is getting you to critically appraise the information based on who was writing it and at the time they were writing it. So really, as you go through the exercises this week, which are challenging, and you're going to wonder, why am I doing this stuff? It's because we want to make sure you build these skills on how to carefully read and carefully interpret text and information. And I think in today's world, with the the sheer amount of information we have pushed in our face all the time, it's really important to make sure that your appraisal of information is accurate and you just don't latch on to any like conspiracy theory or any rumor that you hear as true. So that's why we're going through these exercises, and they're hard, and I'll talk about them a little bit more as we go through this program. So that's why I had the syllabus out, so you understand why we're doing what we're doing, especially this week when some of these are a little challenging, but you'll get through them. The nice thing about Inquisitive, the program that's attached and that you will use for the exercise this week, is that it always gives you an opportunity to score perfectly. If you miss some, it gives you an opportunity to adapt and go back and see what you missed and improved. And I went through the exercises this morning. I didn't get through them in the first time, but I did achieve a perfect score by learning from my wrong answers in the past. So I'll leave that with you and move on to the textbook. This week, there are two themes that I want you to remember. Now, you're probably not going to read the entire text. And what I learned was this week that if I just wanted to go in and complete the course exercises, that all the documents I need are right there in the exercise program. So I wasn't referring back to the chapter very much, but that having been said, I still want you to read the chapter and especially read about two major themes that we're going to talk about here real quick. And the first one is the Little Ice Age. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the Little Ice Age before. Probably many of you have. I think it's pretty basic world history all the way down into primary education these days. But the Little Ice Age was a period of time, and it varies between the 1500s and all the way into the 1700s, where the climate on Earth really changed. Like temperatures dropped a lot. And scientists aren't really positive over how this happened. There's lots of theories that relate the Little Ice Age to volcanic eruptions during those eras, which tended to block out the sun and change the Earth's atmosphere. And then there are other theories that said the reforestation of North America after most of the Native Americans died, the reforestation, not the deforestation, but after American Indians were pretty much all killed out by European diseases, a lot of the tilled land that they had in the country in North America regrew, and it added extra carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which caused some climate change. But I don't really buy that one. But there are some theories about why this climate change occurred. So it's relevant to today's time only because when you read about climate change in this chapter, you're going to see that entire empires, okay, dissolved because there was a disruption in food supplies, there were riots, there was disease. This is going on right after the Black Death, so there's all sorts of issues going on. And so as you read through the beginning of this chapter, take in all of the information you can about the Little Ice Age, because I think what it does for us is it teaches us that a little variation in our climate, a little disruption in crops, causes big problems. And even though we're witnessing big hurricanes right now and a lot of controversy around climate change, I contend we still haven't been hit hard in this country where there's no food in certain areas, that sort of thing. So pay attention to it because I think it's relevant to what we're living today, and I think it's very interesting from a historical standpoint. Now, that having been said, and I have to get some water. Thank you. The basic point of this whole chapter is it goes through all these different civilizations around the world and says, hey, here's how the Little Ice Age and climate change affected all these civilizations. So all the way through from the Ottoman Empire to China, certainly Europe, and into the Americas, and the fall of the Ming Dynasty in China. Those things are all related to the Little Ice Age because when people start to starve, when there's no daylight, when your water supplies are scarce, people get upset and they tend to rise up against the government. The revolutions are often caused by people who don't have food. Climate change can do that. So that's sort of the point of the chapter and the subject matter of the chapter. And again, I will tell you, you probably don't need to read every word in this chapter, but please go through and find out how the Little Ice Age affected all these different areas, because I think it's really interesting. All the way through to Japan. I mean, it was a global event. So there's that part that really kind of covers the big theme of climate change in the chapter. The other big theme in the chapter is about commerce. Now, we talked about slavery and commerce in the last unit, so we already know that there was a lot of expansion going on in the 1400s and the 1500s. We talked a little bit about slavery and the Atlantic slave trade, and there's more of that in this chapter, and really sort of the other theme to pull out besides the Little Ice Age is not only the growth of commerce, but sort of the reason why commerce grew, and really comes back to the reason why slavery grew so much. And it's Dr. Dan's, another one of Dr. Dan's grand theories of history that just says follow the money. I mean, people don't do stuff unless there's money in it for them, for the most part. I mean, some people do things based on religion, based on their beliefs. There's a lot of good in people, but a lot of this history that we're reading about is about money and trade and countries becoming wealthy and individuals becoming wealthy. So the interesting thing here is, as you read about all this, and it's like, hey, why does slavery get so big? Well, it's free labor, and the reason free labor was needed was because of addictions. Okay, addictions to stimulants, addictions to sugar, and by that, more specifically, I mean that addictions to coffee, addictions to tea, and addictions to sugar were huge. And because of those stimulants and those addictions, and the fact that these Western civilizations had to have those things, they were willing to pay for them. And if you're willing to pay for stuff like coffee, like, hey, we pay $4 a cup at Starbucks now. If you're willing to pay for something like coffee, someone's willing to go get it for you and grow it for you no matter what. So really this idea of making money from selling stimulants and selling sugar, it's the technology of that age, okay? And I'll explain that a little bit, but making money off of those things drives everything. All right. If there was no profit in slavery, no one would do it. If there was no profit in the slave trade, no one would do it. Okay. So you got to look at sort of morality versus profit, morality versus money when you approach the slave trade. Why did it happen? How could it happen? And we're only looking at it in the context of today's liberalism, not in the context of back then. So it's really difficult for us to understand the slave trade. But as you read this chapter, the brutality of the slave trade certainly comes to light, because there's the classic little graphic of the slave ship, and I know you've all seen those in your history books before, where there's a design on how to get the maximum number of enslaved people into a ship, and we all know about the terrible conditions of slave ships coming over to North America. And we're going to learn about that in a little bit more detail in the exercise this week, because there is an account from Olada Equiano, who is one of the few accounts of a slave, that means a written narrative, first person, who came over on the ship or on one of the slave ships and writes about how terrible the experience was. Now, there's some questions to the authenticity of his account, but at the same time, one of the things we'll be reading about is the brutality on the slave ships, and that have to be careful, and that relates back to your reading this week and the exercise as well. So there's that part, and then the other thing to think about when we talk about the power of addiction, I mean, sugar was a brand new thing. No one knew about it before. It's sort of like the internet. No one knew about the internet, then it came and it was like, wow, everybody had to have it. Well, imagine sugar. No one ever knew about sugar before. And I think, most of us know sugar is a pretty good thing. So, it was the cocaine of its day. People couldn't get enough of it. And so the demand for sugar drives the growth of slavery, and it also drives these giant sugar processing plantations like in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, or we're going to read about Jamaica in one of our primary source exercises, down in Haiti, down in that area. That's where all of these really brutal sugar plantations were, that were run both by the Spanish, the English, and the French. And so there's a guy who writes about, his name's Ligons. I don't know if it's Richards, but it's Ligons, and he again is a historical figure. He's a plantation owner in the Barbados, and one of the primary source exercises this week is reading about how he feels about the slaves, and how he has sort of a grand theory of race, and how it comes together in his plantation. So again, that's another part of the primary source exercises. It looks at a writing of a plantation owner from his point of view. And then finally, as you go through the rest of the chapter, it talks a little bit about coffee houses in England, but not only in England. When we talk about the Ottoman Empire was the same thing, really sort of the origins of coffee. You've heard of Turkish coffee before, I'm sure. So again, when we think about slavery and why does all this stuff happen, it's really about the consumption of stimulants on a global scale. It was new. Sugar was new to everybody. And since transportation's new, you could get stuff for the first time. I mean, could you imagine, getting sugar for the first time ever? That's pretty cool. So think about that. And as we go through, the chapter talks a little bit about global commerce and climate change, and this notion of mercantilism and what that is. And that's a theory by which the old guard, all right, things used to operate in the old days as far as commerce is concerned. It was really countries versus countries. So England would fund and charter these companies like the East India. Well, that's Dutch, but East India Company was Dutch, and these other companies were chartered as part of the government, because under mercantilism, it was all about governments getting rich more so than individuals. So it was really like Spain versus France versus England, and it was all based on that theory, or this theory that there was a finite amount of wealth in the world. All right, so if someone got more, it was less from someone else, and it really revolved around how many areas you could colonize, how many weapons you could buy, how many people you could take over. And we know that in the end, and we're not there yet, England ends up with this big empire for all of those reasons. Read through this and read about the commodities and how that all comes together. And really, sort of the opposite of mercantilism, that we were just talking about is really global corporations now, all right? Where it used to be countries that were worried about gaining wealth for the country so they could build up that military. Now, global corporations, kind of rule the world. And, our governments serve those corporations. Or at least that's the way I feel about it. It's the wealth no longer flows to countries, it flows to individuals and stockholders, and it's just a different way that commerce has evolved over the years. So sorry, didn't mean to go on with that. So anyway, before I close here real quick, because I've been going way too long, do not guess when you're doing these primary source exercises in Inquisitive. You'll not do well. They require very careful reading. And again, it's not a waste of time. It just you need to learn to be able to discern text and pick up the facts out of text very carefully. All right, because it's going to help you read other things, whether it's the news or other text in your life. So that's it for this week. The big themes: Little Ice Age. Okay, really the power of stimulants to create an appetite for sugar, for coffee, and really sort of as a driver for slavery. It's about the money. So those are the big themes. And then finally, just be careful on the primary source exercises. And if you work through them very slowly and read the material they provide you'll do just fine. That's it for this week. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.